Good evening. I think I need a clicker here. I am so grateful for the two prior speakers tonight and for their amazing work. They're also going to help me move a little more quickly through some of my slides, so hopefully we'll make up some time. My name is Laura Granich. I'm the director of the Missouri Jobs with Justice Coalition. Actually, really first briefly want to speak to you tonight, though, as someone from North County. I grew up in Glasgow Village, and I want to the issues that this commission is dealing with, not just tonight, but in all your work, are very, very near and dear to me and my family, and I know all the work and time and leadership you are bringing to this space, and I want to just really start by expressing my gratitude for the hard work of the commissioners here. I'm speaking more formally tonight, though, as the Director of Jobs with Justice, and we are a statewide coalition of more than 100 organizations and tens of thousands of individuals working together on issues of workers' rights and economic policy. What we are not is an advocacy group. We are not doing for working people at Jobs with Justice. We are a community that stands behind working people who are standing up for themselves. You already heard from Jobs with Justice when you heard from Kaylin Smith, when you heard from Danielle Polk, who told her story for the first time tonight with great courage. You missed Mike Cogshell, but Mike, do you want to stand up for a minute and just wave to folks? Mike works at Sonic and Dollar General. He'll be in smaller groups later where you can get to know him. It is that perspective, that of working people taking action to make their lives better for themselves and their families, that really informs our central point tonight. And that is that this question of economic inequality and opportunity is not simply one of how do we share the benefits of the economy. It is much more importantly one of how do we share the power within our economy. How do we share the power to make a claim upon and hold on to a fair and secure living for our families? I'm going to start by quickly going over some key dynamics. They're probably not unfamiliar to any of us, but it's worth reminding ourselves that this crisis, this loss of ourselves as a land of opportunity, is not the result of forces of nature or the laws of physics. It is a result of decisions, and we can make new decisions. We can make different decisions. The heart of this presentation, however, is going to be the stories of the working people in this room and some that couldn't be with us tonight, the people who are solving this problem of inequality and opportunity for themselves and their families by taking a stand, by calling for their place at the table in their workplace and in their community. I believe their stories make the case that we will all live in a more thriving community if we have more faith in the power and the wisdom of the people doing the work. So our deep belief in ourselves as the land of opportunity is a belief that has given us the faith to work hard. That belief is fading to nostalgia in this country, and I'm very grateful to Dr. Purnell for so clearly illustrating that point to us here tonight. The American dream was never equally shared in our nation's history, and it is not today, but it was at least more complete to the next generation each time, until now. This generation is the first that has no reasonable expectation of being more prosperous than the one before it. This is the result of many things, including the dismantling of institutions that created shared power in our communities and in our economy. Workers are losing wages, families are losing health insurance, but that we have all lost power is at the heart of things. Let's take a quick, closer look. There are so many things greasing the rungs of the ladder. We are losing the key ways that we were taught to invest in ourselves and build our capital in the economy. Our friend from the Federal Reserve talked a good bit about the housing crisis and foreclosures and mortgages. Payday lending rates were also discussed earlier tonight. And I want to be clear, the situation with payday lending is not just about the choices of folks, it is about the choices of our government and our state to let payday lenders run rampant in this state. Student debt. We are taught higher education is a way that we're going to get ahead, we're going to make things better. It is unfortunately now increasingly a stone around the neck of people as they enter that economy. It's hard to even make those investments when work doesn't pay. Over the last 30 to 40 years, real wages for the vast majority of the workforce have been declining or stagnant even while productivity rose. And while wages are lower, they're also far more insecure. More than a third of the US workforce was contingent as far back as 2006. That means they're in some sort of temporary, part-time, subcontracted agreement, and that number is expanding quickly in the new kind of gig economy, TaskRabbit, Uber, Airbnb. And if you want job security, wouldn't you look where you expect to see the most hiring? You're not going to get many answers there. If you look at projections for the St. Louis region, the top 4 occupations for job growth all earn $25,000 a year or less. This is really important. If we take away nothing else tonight, even if every St. Louisan got a college education or high skill training, employers' greatest needs are still going to be someone to run the drive-through, put products on the store shelves, and take care of grandma while the rest of us are at work. And right now, those jobs do not support us. Right now. This is grave, and it's grave for all of us. This wild imbalance of power, and therefore in the benefits of our society, has implications for everyone, from the 1% to the 99%. It means a shrinking tax base, it means dropping consumer demand, it means a strain on social institutions like our public educational system, our churches. It means social unrest. It has put our community in the global stage in a terrible way. That doesn't mean we need to turn back the clock, though. I don't want to say we need to look back to some sort of nostalgic era of golden age of shared prosperity. We really need to look ahead to new models that create shared economic and community power in a new, rapidly changing global economy. And the good news, we're going to have good news, not just depressing statistics tonight. The good news is that right here in our community, working people have been innovating and building new ways to claim the power they need together. Workers in some of the fastest growing jobs in our community are taking responsibility for making their jobs better jobs. Not just for themselves, but for those that will follow them into this work. In 2006, working people took to the statewide ballot an increase in the minimum wage. And in this like red versus blue state, we really found consensus. It won in every county by nearly 20 points. But for our discussion today, what happened next is actually even more interesting. The state's Department of Labor made an error interpreting the language, and they advised that there was no change in the minimum wage for workers that earn tips, like restaurant servers, baggage handlers. In response, throughout the state, working people reached out to those tipped employees using tip cards. As a truck driver went through Joplin, he got like everyone at the Waffle House in Joplin to like take these tip cards and call their legislator. At the Denny's on Hampton, an entire shift of servers turned in wage complaints together. This citizen-to-citizen outreach moved Governor Blunt to overturn his own Department of Labor. And in this case, working people were able to exercise their power together and claim their due. Restaurant servers are the 3rd highest projected job growth in St. Louis. Home care workers took another very innovative approach, combining their collective power as voters to create some collective voice at work. You heard from Ms. Mary Woods today. Her daughter, Monica Woods, is her caregiver. Home care workers are a perfect example of the increasingly complex nature of employment in our economy. The consumer the attendant works for is their employer, but a lot of their key working conditions are defined by government programs like the Consumer Directed Services Program under Medicaid. So these workers came together and overwhelmingly passed the Quality Home Care Act in 2008 and created this innovative Quality Home Care Council that allows attendants an entity with which they can bargain over key working conditions. This is a field where unions have not been the norm, but where mothers and grandmothers who make a living caring for others decided that it was time to use their voices to make enough money to care for themselves too. These groundbreaking leaders bargained a raise to $10.15 at the end of last year. But as you heard today, they are still waiting for the state to honor the agreement they fairly won. We can help make sure they find the same power to claim what they earn that tipped workers did in 2007. Personal care attendants are the occupation with the 2nd highest job growth expected in Missouri over the next 8 years. Finally, one of the most high-profile and very powerful and inspiring efforts underway in our community right now has been organizing by fast food workers for 15 in a union. Your fellow commissioner, Rasheen Aldridge, was an early leader in the stages of this organizing. This industry is another example of how we see workers in a rapidly changing economy taking a stand. We have this image of fast food workers as kids, but as you can see tonight, and as you might be surprised to hear generally, the average age of a fast food worker is 31. And they work in an industry that can well afford higher wages. Fast food workers are the occupation with the #1 highest projected job growth in St. Louis, Missouri, and Missouri over the next 8 years. I am so grateful for these friends and neighbors that are doing the work of making their workplaces better. Like my neighbor that takes a stand and organizes in the face of growing crime in the community instead of just taking the easy way out and picking up and moving, they are taking responsibility for leaving their workplace better than they found it. It's hopeful. Figuring out at least some of our problems might not be as hard as we think. Those in the fastest growing jobs in this community are organized, and they are clearly and publicly naming what they need to restore economic security and opportunity for their families. We don't have to wonder what it will take. They're telling us the most important thing we can do is stop fighting them and listen. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lauren, to all of our presenters. We are going to just modify the agenda a little bit. Instead of taking Q&A now, because you've been sitting a long time, we're going to break into our small group discussions, for those of you who have been here before and participated. And we have 4 small group breakout sessions. The first one, and then would the facilitator please stand, so if you want to follow that facilitator. The first one is on jobs, income, and employment, and Rebecca will be facilitating that breakout session. Then we have business and entrepreneurship. Risa will be facilitating that session. Housing will be facilitated by Cynthia, and transportation by Monique, who's in the back in the blue. Now, again, we are asking you 2 questions. They're the same questions for each subject area. And the first one is, what are the key issues or concerns you have in this area? And of course, the second question is, what are your ideas for improving this particular problem in our community? Now, I'm going to tell you where the breakout sessions are. If you're interested in jobs, income, and employment, that room is right to the left of where you registered, room 202. If you want to attend business and entrepreneurship, that is in room 204, which is around the corner and down the hall. If you're interested in housing and transportation, both of those breakout sessions are upstairs, so you can either take the steps or you can take the elevator. We have 50 minutes for those breakout sessions, and then we'll reconvene in this room. Thank you.
And more people are coming in, so thank you. Thank you for continuing to stay with us.
Could everyone please take their seats so we can continue with the commission's work? Shh.
you like the light? Thank you. We're waiting on two commissioners to come back. This part of the meeting, this is the official part of the meeting of which the commission does its planning and its administration. So first thing I wanted to do is to talk about the budget. The Ferguson Commission budget was approved on January 10th, and I'd like to walk commissioners and the public through the information. On the revenue side, you will see in the state of Missouri that we had total Missouri revenue at $200,000 from both MOHELA and Missouri Development Finance Board, and a sum total of private support at $130,000. Those of you that don't see the visual, we don't have one for tonight, so I'm reading it out loud to you. On the expenses side, the budget that we had already approved was at $1.36 million. Those expenses are broken into categories of independent contractors, professional fees, operations, the printing and design of the commission's report, and also most of the funding that we're receiving will go toward the commission meetings and community engagement. Our work group meetings where each of the co-chairs breaks out to talk about the specific issues based on the topics that we have affirmed in our charge, community events, and website maintenance. So to date, as you look at our expenses, our total expenses to date are $58,420, with our total revenue being $330,000. And right now, in terms of cash, commissioners, we have $271,000 in cash at this time. We do have some commitments that will be coming into the commission. We are happy to say that there are commitments for funding from the state of Missouri, the Community Services Block Grant, and Community Development Block Grant funding. That's a total of $775,000 that'll be coming in. Okay, that's an overview of our budget to date. Any questions or comments on that? We want to thank the United Way for their leadership and their partnership in watching our expenses, and these reports will come to the commission on a monthly basis. What we want to do now is to transition, so if commissioners are more comfortable to sit where they can see the PowerPoint slide, or if you'd like to stay where you are seated, we're going to refer to the PowerPoint that is in front of us. Okay, however you're most comfortable. Much of this information that's going to be given sets the context for the working group meetings and the priority areas focus. So this is as much for the community as for the commission. As a recap, we know that the community priorities have been set by the community convenings that we've had from the November timeframe through today. So on the left are the community priorities that have been set, both the central issues and the disparities focused. And what we've done is we've taken those priority areas and we focused them in working groups: citizen law enforcement relations, municipal courts and governance, education and equity and child well-being, and tonight was the launch of the economic inequity and opportunity. The racial and ethnic relations work is in development as we speak, which will be our last piece of cross-cutting information and engagement within the community. Again, we are affirming the principles that we approved during our 120 meeting, that each working group, regardless of what the topic is, will explore the underlying and social economic issues in the region using a common set of principles. There are four. One, we will honor community expertise and youth perspective. Although today is important, what's more important is to create a model for what can be. We heard a lot about that tonight. We like to always leverage existing data to generate evidence-based recommendations. And the fourth one is to center on our principles of equity and justice, always prioritizing action with a sense of urgency. This is my slide. Working group final products then, regardless of the working groups, you will see again in front of you best practice recommendations and models that will also be engaged in the feasibility assessment and implementation and translation beyond the commission and community engagement. All of our meetings are sunshine law in which we encourage and gather the input and feedback into these working groups to develop these final products. Within each of these levels, we will have policy recommendations, There's opportunity for system level change. Some of these can come through practices that don't have to be legislated, that could be identified, and as well on the individual level. I'll turn it over to co-chairs at this time to take us further.
So this is just to give a bit of update on where we've been with the respective working groups. We note that the first working group we stood up was with Commissioner Isom giving leadership to citizen law enforcement relations. We should note that since the last meeting, we have added Commissioner Packnett as a co-chair of this particular working group. This gives us opportunity to leverage the work of the President's 21st Century Policing Task Force and her engagement there to bring that alongside the longstanding leadership that Commissioner Isom has provided for our community and now our state in this area. To date, this committee has completed 3 meetings since its launch on the 8th. Several of those have been here, the most recent of which was just last week. Also, in the Municipal Courts and Governance group was next that was stood up, led by Commissioners Reverend Blackman and Dr. Carr. They have had 1 meeting on February 17th and another with context from the 12/15 launch. So that meeting I had the occasion to be a participant in last week, robustly attended and engaged. They, of course, have also been in the process of both of these groups really in doing listening throughout the community, not just to what has happened in these meetings, but leaders meeting with various groups that are engaging in reform throughout the community, both in municipal courts and citizen law enforcement relations. Just to talk a little bit about the selection of membership for these working groups. We recognize that, of course, the members were selected by working group co-chairs, but there was a significant amount of thought and process put into those. A few inputs for selection include the perusal and engagement. Quite frankly, this isn't on the slide, but folks who have been in these meetings and have been engaged in the work and breakouts have been considered for these. They've conducted these kind of stakeholder interviews with folks who have been engaged in these processes to confirm representatives within different groups. So notably, if you look at the municipal courts group, you recognize that with the work that's going on within with several judges, Judge Vatterott has been a part here as one of those folks that have been interviewed and has engaged in the ongoing work. We also had the participation and engagement of the state to help us to review the more than 300 applicants for the commission for their respective expertise in various topical areas to consider them and make outreach for various groups to be members of the working groups. And then finally, inviting notable grassroots and institutional organizations to nominate representatives to serve on various working groups. And that has been a diverse group of institutions and organizations from the Don't Shoot Coalition and the Organization for Black Struggle to the Mosaic Project and the St. Louis Economic Development Council, all of these providing inputs where appropriate for the different working groups. At this point, I think
just one quick comment. We'll turn this around so the co-chairs of the working groups can address the group as well as the commission, so you all can ask questions. So this is a point where these working groups have developed recommendations that are now ready for our action, and so they'll be asking for you all to look at the policy priorities and to react to them. And also one thing that I wanted to add to what Starsky said is the Education, Inequality, and Child Well-Being group is having their first meeting tomorrow afternoon. Co-chair Becky James Hatter will be chairing that meeting, and the other co-chair is Grayling Tobias, who unfortunately can't be there tomorrow but has been very active, and they will be meeting here in this facility at 5 p.m. Tomorrow. So I think with that, Dan, we're ready for you to present to us.
As was mentioned earlier, this is the update on the Citizen Law Enforcement Relations Work Group, co-chairs myself and then Brittany Packnett. As you can see, there we go. The participants in that task force are listed here. In the next slide, we recap what we've learned from you. Enforce Missouri profiling laws was mentioned. increase police screening and training, address the fear-based excessive use of force, and improve youth and police interactions. As we've worked through some of these issues in our working group, you can see in the next slide that we did a review of the legislation that has been filed in Jeff City so far and matched that with some of the suggestions of the community, but also input from the work group. So one of the first areas is update use of force statute and also consider adequate documentation. So the work group suggested that the use of force statute should be updated. There is current legislation out there with regard to that, and that there should be documentation statewide of use of force incidents. The second area was create a legal mechanism for the empowerment of a civilian oversight that would emphasize civil rights enforcement. That topic is really a little bit more broadly, should be a little bit more broadly defined than it is there, meaning that empower some kind of body to have oversight in terms of civil rights enforcement throughout the state. But it could be defined on a local level, meaning that we might support policies within municipalities where they would empower a civilian review board or civilian oversight. The next item will be implement measures and standards for anti-bias training and core cultural competencies. And so there is legislation regarding those issues out there and the matter of increased training. Increase the rigor of law enforcement preparation through a new certification standard or training opportunities. So another idea in terms of more training opportunities, but also certification standards for police departments. Ensure police agencies have access to prior records of prospective hires. So a law that would open up the files of previous police department employees or employees who have left other police departments. So the new hiring agency would have their prior records. And then the last item was to strengthen the whistleblower protection within police departments. So allowing police departments, police employees to be able to come forward and tell things that they find that may be inappropriate or illegal. So these are sort of the broad areas that we have, and the work group will go back and try to marry them with legislation that's out there that's currently been filed. Question? Okay, no comments? Call for a motion to accept. So move. I don't know how we want to handle that. Do you want to? Well, this is sort of the comment section, and if you have more information, you certainly could provide it to us later through email or any type of communication you want to, and we will certainly consider that as we move forward. Is that fine?
This is about achieving a certain scope of work, and we believe that part of the scope is inadequate. How do we deal with that perceived preliminary scope?
Right. So if you think it's inadequate, then you can, what would be the process for providing more information to us?
So I think there are a couple of things. we should say, so part of what we've asked the working groups to do is to identify priorities within their groups. Those that have met in their last meeting spent time reviewing legislation that was moving so that we could make sure that we're being responsive. But this is an iterative process. There'll continue to be things that are moving. So what we're trying to do is make sure that we're in a place to set some broad priorities in the various working groups that are moving to say, there are some things here that we know the community has identified, and there are legislators perhaps in some setting, there are policymakers in various settings working on it, and we want to identify that these are priorities for us so that we have some space and room based upon community input, data that's been received to date, and that has been processed to be able to go forward. That's not to say that everything is processed or this is the final and comprehensive work, but so my question would rather be, because you were at the meeting, do these things reflect conversation that happened in those meetings, and do these things reflect, not are they everything, but do they reflect the conversations?
They reflect some of the conversations, yeah,
Okay.
but not, but, you know, to the extent that we can put up some bullets and make believe that that's the whole show, you have to be watchful of the reduction we do
Okay.
in process.
Yep.
And, you know, I would go back to my notes and come up with a couple of line items of concern, you know, and there are also issues that kind of cross over with the municipal courts and municipal governance.
Yep.
That are kind of shared issues between those two courts.
Yeah.
Right. I think what we tried to do also is that we had 3 different breakout groups, and we looked at each category and tried to see where there was consistency across smaller work groups. So there very well might be items that are missing, only because we wanted to make sure that this was consistent amongst all the working groups.
And from a-
Polling preferences, but that tends to exclude ideas held by a few, which may be no less valid.
That's true.
That is a dangerous flaw in this process, because basically, you know, a show of hands, who's in favor of pie, you'll get a lot of that.
Yeah. No, the other thing that we've got to be thoughtful about, for the sake of just being clear about expectations, as much as I think everyone should do what I want them to do, that's not going to come out of the other end of the process. So everything that happens in every work group and every page of the more than 800 pages of transcription we have in our meetings won't come out of the policy recommendation. And so there will be things that won't make its way through as well. So I'm not saying that that's the case here. I'm saying that this is an iterative process. But I'm also saying from an expectation standpoint, we know that some of our best thinking, at least I know the best of my thinking had made it through, and I think it's a really good idea. So let's just, from a broad expectation standpoint, we want to keep that in mind as well. But right now, we want the work group to be able to push out some stuff that reflects this thinking. And I think we say that this does reflect the thinking in this work group. And even though it's not all of it, so what the commissioners are being asked to do is to act on what the work group has done at this point, that the work group chairs have presented, to see if we can move forward on these things as they are currently presented. Commissioner James Haddon.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, to his point, and so I'll get to be in your place in a couple of weeks. So when we report back to the community about what we're hearing in our work groups, if they're members of the community that think we really need to rethink something, left something off, it seems to me that whether it's email me directly as the co-chair and say, I think you left this off, I want you to rethink it. It's just the opportunity for it not to get lost. It really is a reconsideration or a rethinking that should come directly to the co-chairs. And then if we're, for whatever reason, say, we have rethought it, we're not putting it on there, or whatever the response is, then we can give them that feedback as well. So maybe there's just a place where it goes, whether it's the co-chairs or the staff. But it allows him to not let us forget.
Yeah. The other good thing to remember here, although Chief would love to be, he ain't done either. So there's another work group where you're going to come and you're going to talk to him about these things that are not here, and that those things will still be processed.
contact@stlpositivechange.org.
Is it possible to approve this as a starting place and not in totality?
Right. That's exactly what we're asking the commission to do.
So if we put that language in there, then there's room to add those things that perhaps are missing.
Yeah, to be clear, let's talk about a couple of things. Our final work in charge is to present policy recommendations that can address some of these underlying issues. These are priority areas where there is policy moving. Does that make sense? Right? So this has to be further refined, but we also don't want to be processing and not engaging. And the affirmation of the commission today gives its leadership in various spaces the authority to actually work here. Because right now, we're just processing. Okay? Commissioner Gore.
I have a question. I just have a question about bullet point 1, and you might have said this, I might have missed it. Where it says, I understand an update use of force statute, but then it says, and consider adequate documentation. I'm not sure what that means.
I think the committee was saying that we should, on a, I guess, statewide level, have some kind of database that would track use of force issues. Now, that does exist in some fashion in UCR, but I think that would have to be flushed out a little bit more. So just documentation of use of force incidents.
Okay. But that probably, when we talk about the use of force statute, we're talking about the actual Missouri statute that sets forth the standard on use of force. Is that what we're
Yes.
referring to? Okay.
Yes.
And then that, consider adequate documentation, that probably would be a separate regulation or statute. It wouldn't be part of the same statute.
I would think it would be a separate statute that would talk about collection of use of force information. Now, there's not necessarily a federal statute for it, but there are federal guidelines that dictate what type of information should be collected in terms of use of force. So the question would be, do you want to actually have a state requirement for that?
Thank you.
Yeah, yeah.
Rose made the motion.
Mr. Chairman?
Go ahead, Kevin.
I'd like to move that the commission support these priorities for further study by the Citizens Law Enforcement Relation Committee.
So move?
I would amend it not to exclude further.
Sir, just on a protocol, the commission is acting, and while it acts in public, it acts as a body. And so amendments would need to come from commissioners as well.
All in favor? Do we vote?
Call the question.
Call a question? All in favor?
All in favor? Aye.
Oh, we got a question.
We're in a discussion right now. I'm not saying now, I'm saying in the future it would be amended. Are we under discussion, Mr. Chairman?
I thought we had moved past discussion and voted. We said all in favor? Oppose? So moved. Motion carries.
Okay. Thanks. Motion carries.
Yeah, right. I think it was very clear by Kevin's motion that this was an endorsement of these priorities now and that they would be further discussed at future meetings. So I think it's been pretty clear all the way through, and I think that answers your question. We do need to move on to hear from the Task Force on Municipal Court Reform, and so I would ask Reverend Tracy Blackman and Dr. T.R. Carr to come up and present those, and then call for a motion, second to get it on the floor and have discussion, and we'll move forward from there, please.
Good evening. Good evening. Don't go to sleep on us. It's now time for municipal courts. We've only met once. We're not as far along as the group that you just heard from. We had our first meeting last week, and we had a response of about 50 people showing up for the work group, which we were delighted with. As a consequence, we have not yet named the members of the group. We wanted to invite everyone that was interested, as well as people we were targeting to hear from, and the response was overwhelming, and now we'll go through that and give personal invitations to people to join. So the good news is there is still room for you if you want to come. We will talk just from 2 slides. The first one, we want to recap what we learned from listening in our first meeting, and also overlapping that with what we've heard in, what am I supposed to be doing? I'm not. Okay. Click. I'm a talker, not a clicker. So we want to recap what we heard from, it's late, I'm sorry. We want to recap what we heard from our meeting, as well as what we've heard from the commission meetings as well. Based on our time in the work group and based on the sessions that were done here, we've come up with 4 general areas of focus, very broad areas. Someone mentioned in the group that there's going to be some overlap between municipal courts and the policing work group, because those 2 work in tandem together. We want to look at how we can enforce existing laws on revenue caps, understanding that the Attorney General does have some legislation out now to decrease that cap amount from 30% to 10%, and it has passed through the Senate. We're not sure what's going to happen in the House, but prior to that, we already had on the books a law that capped it at 30%, but it's a poorly written and not implemented law. So we want to see what we can do around that, if anything. Secondly, we want to address the issue of uniform practices, and what that means is that right now in the 82 municipalities, we have different fine limits, different procedures. People are being stopped. You can be stopped in Delwood for one thing, and in Ferguson you wouldn't be stopped for it. Or you get a fine in Normandy for something, and the fine is a different amount for the same offense in another municipality. We want to see what we can do to give community voice and community power to the process of uniform fines and uniform policies of engaging citizens. The third area is empowering residents to know their rights. This comes specifically from municipal courts, where many of the things that people end up in court for are not criminal offenses. And because they're not criminal offenses, they are not required to provide a public defender if you can't afford a lawyer. So what can we do to empower residents to know their rights? And there are some very innovative things on the table in terms of being able to help in that regard. And the fourth one is to improve access to courts, and that came from repeated comments about the court hours, the number of people who are allowed in court, the problem with if you work and you have small children and can't afford childcare and not being able to bring your child with you to court, the fact that court is not open except for a couple of days a week, which limits one's ability to get into court, and the long lines there. So all of that goes into that big bucket. So these, each one of them encompasses quite a lot of things, but we wanted to put it in a way that you could digest it today. And as we move forward with the work group, we'll be delving into those individual areas. If you have an interest in any or all of these, we invite you to join us in the work group sessions. We would like to hear from you. I knew you were going to ask me that. Monique, when is the next meeting? Okay, so in case you did not hear her, tentatively, we're looking at next Tuesday. We've been trying to have the meetings at a time that makes it conducive for people who work and for young people to attend, so we're staying around 4 to 5:30. We're being very good, very diligent about getting out at the time that we say. And as soon as that meeting is confirmed, it will be on UMSL's campus. As soon as that meeting is confirmed, it will be on our website. If you are interested in this work group and you'd like more direct information about what's going on, if you'll just send an email to Monique. I bet you thought I was going to say me, didn't you? Send an email to Monique and let her know so that you'll be on our direct mailing list as well, and you'll be notified when the meeting time occurs. So I'm going to turn it over to my co-chair who will dig a little deeper. Do I need to click for you? Okay.
Thank you, Tracy. Our working group really based its findings on a lot of information that was provided for us at the December larger commission meeting, and then following up by the actual work group that we had. And these priorities are not complete. We are continuing to work in this process. We'll be evaluating it, and we'll be expanding it over time. As we look at this, we're saying what we want to do is, number one, enforce state-established cap on traffic fine revenue that a municipality may collect. That has not been enforced, and legal action has been taken by the Attorney General. If you read the current statute, as Tracy indicated, the statute is very vague. It does not specify enforcement mechanism. It does not specify consequences. So we believe it should be enforced. We also believe it should clarify reporting requirements, because current reporting requirements are somewhat vague in existing legislation. Enforcement responsibility, and define exactly what is traffic revenue. So Senate Bill number 5 is working its way through the House. It will be amended, but it contains a lot of provisions, and our working group will continue to address that issue. Second issue deals with developing alternatives to imprisonment and fines for failure to appear. Failure to appear is there's a phenomenon in St. Louis County. It's kind of manifests itself as what we call a round robin. Individuals being picked up in one municipality, having to go to another municipality as a result of arrest warrants based on failure to appear. And we believe that a mechanism needs to be developed to address that. We've been working with several groups, and we want to work with the state legislature to deal with those round robins, failure to appear, the issue of excessive fines, and potential imprisonment for failure to appear. Another issue that emerged dealt with the ability to pay. And one of the things that we have talked about is the possibility of developing some type of community service mechanism in concert with fines, or payment on time, schedule payments, things like that. So our bullet points are somewhat narrow, or somewhat broad, but they contain lots and lots of specifics that we'll be working with in the future. One is to create a uniform list of rights and procedural options and consequences across municipalities. One thing that is specified in state law is that a public defender is only required if you face jail. But at the same time, if you've ever gone to a municipal court, you walk into a court, there's a judge down front, there's a lot of people sitting around, there's a prosecuting attorney, and people are confused. They don't know what their options are. They don't know even what the procedures are going to be followed. And we believe that there should be a mechanism that would allow individuals to be informed about what's the process, what are the procedures that are being followed in municipal courts, what are their rights, and then we'll begin to investigate other issues such as what kind of assistance the courts probably should provide to individuals as they enter the intermunicipal court, probably for the first time. So these are some very, very, very broad issues. We're going to continue our discussion. And even though there are items that have maybe not been included, this is a start, and we're going to continue to expand on these and define and refine these in the future. We'll take a couple of questions, and then we'll go from there. Yes? That's the round robin that we're talking about, and we want to address those. We're very, very aware of that, and that's part of our discussion. So it is included.
Did you have something else to say about it?
Actually, what the point that I'm trying to make is, in the event that you are wanted in multiple jurisdictions, there's a long process in which you would have to wait, and you have to, in the event that you can't post bond, you have to wait until the next court session, in jail. And you have,
Totally to another jail.
and you transfer you to another jail, and you, at that point, you have to wait until that court, if you can't make bond there, you have to wait until that court process
Yeah.
starts.
Yeah, we're very much aware of that, and that's the round robin that we're talking about. Tracy?
What Tiara is mentioning, we're just calling it round robin, is trying to come up with a process that we could perhaps get the judges and the municipal courts to sign off on, that you could satisfy all warrants at one stop. We're just calling it round robin. But
I'm working, I manage the law office, and I deal with this
Mhm.
every day. People lose their jobs, their house.
So what are you doing next Tuesday? Stop on by our work group and let's have this conversation.
Okay. Yes, sir.
Okay? Before this one? Policing. Now you gonna take our turn for them? Dan, you didn't handle your business. Where's Dan? When's your next meeting?
I'm not sure when the next meeting is, but it will be posted on the website. You don't know yet? Who's the chairman of that group? Dan Isom.
Dan Isom. He used to be the chief.
So we'll encourage everyone that all meetings will be posted on the stlpositivechange.org website. stlpositivechange.org website will be a posting for all meetings. If you email contact@stlpositivechange.org, you can be added to the email list for the respective groups. Commissioner Gore, did you have a
Gabe?
question?
Yeah, get,
Okay, what's your question, sir? I'm sorry. Yes, sir. I hear you. I hear you, and I respect that. So hear me. We want to hear all of that. We need to hear it in our work group. So I'm making light of it by inviting people to the work group to have this conversation, but I mean that sincerely. If you will come to the work group and have this conversation with us so that we can document it in our process, that is very important. You're welcome. Thank you. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. Mm-hmm. Well, you can't turn it over. We still fighting. Absolutely. Absolutely. But the reason we have the work groups is because there's so much energy around these issues, and we want to hear from everybody and get you out of here with the time frame that we said. So if you'll please come, we welcome that.
Gabe?
So a couple questions. One, I don't see up there that we're going to consider in the work group the issues that are currently being considered in the legislature, which is the issue of what should the cap be. I see that we're going to look at enforcing the current cap, but is it a priority to consider what should the cap be? I think I asked the question, yeah.
This is, excuse me, well, yeah, the short answer is yes. We're looking at that. The first step is to be sure that it's enforced. The current legislation moving through the Missouri legislature deals with reducing the cap from 30% to 10%. We would hope to be involved in that discussion as well.
It's not an
Because
either, it's not an either
Right,
or,
right.
it's an
Yeah,
and.
it's inclusive.
It's
yeah.
it's a priority to consider that.
Yeah.
That's
It
something
is.
that we're considering as a
Yeah,
priority.
definitely.
We spent some time in the work group, actually. TR gave a small little session on what the SB 5 bill was and what's going through. It had already passed the Senate, and we are considering whether or not we're going to endorse that or not. Is that your question?
Yeah, that is my question, and even broader than just the bill, just the issue in general. I mean, even if, I just think I think that should be a priority to consider what it should be. Not that it should just be whatever it's currently set at.
No, we're continuing to discuss that in our work group.
Okay.
And that will be an item of discussion.
And then my other question is about item 3. So I look at item 2, and it says alternatives to imprisonment. But then if you look at item 3, it says ability to pay, hearing before any individual can be detained or otherwise penalized. That makes it sound like we're still contemplating that there will be situations where people can be detained for not paying. And I just want to know if I was misunderstanding that.
So what you're doing next Tuesday? No, I'm just teasing. It's two different issues, really. One was, at least in our minds, developing alternatives to imprisonment and fines for failure to appear was because we had people testifying in the work group that they were being detained, jailed because they could not come, and when they got arrested for breaking their warrant, they couldn't get out. And the other issue is about when the fine is set, if you already know that a person is not in an economic condition where they could meet the fine that's being set, perhaps they could have an alternative to paying with cash by paying with community service or something like that.
So let me just ask this question. Are we going to make it a priority to consider a system where no one is ever detained for inability to pay? Because my view is that's the type of system we should have, where no one is ever detained because they can't pay a fine.
I think we're on the same page with that.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure that was
Yeah.
a priority to consider that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
God, it's a lot of questions.
Yeah, I would like to be sure that everyone on the panel here, and I alluded to these earlier, you refer to the President's Task Force on 21st Century Policing. And this was an executive order by President Obama given on December 18th, and they have to report, I guess that's where Brittany Packard is right now, Washington, D.C. They have until March 4 to report back to the President.
Yes, sir.
This thing, I guess, goes on for a year.
Mm-hmm.
And this is all being regurgitated, all of this. And I also ask you that you read the article that I alluded to earlier, Hard Truths, Law Enforcement and Race. This all goes back to racism, unfortunately.
It does.
And you know, read this report by the director of the FBI, and the same stuff is being regurgitated here. And, you know, it's already going.
But, Mr. Miller, until it's done, it's not done. So we have to,
The director talks about this also. The director of the FBI, he refers in here to Ferguson. He knows what's going on. He knows what's going on. And this is all being, yeah, I don't know. And what this, you know, now that legislature's in session, they'll be out pretty soon for election coming up in April. And then, you know, I guess we're just kicking the can down another year, and all of this is already being decided.
So, Mr. Miller,
I have concern about this.
Mr. Miller, we have great concerns as well. That's actually why we have this portion of our meeting set up. So we've done two things to address your concerns. Number one, we don't want to wait until September 15th, which is why we're trying to move. We've asked the work groups to say, what are the things we need to prioritize now? We're coming upon 100 days in our work. To be able to say that we have listened to the community, we have heard these things, we have assessed what's moving, and to be able to engage in a dialogue between the conversation that's happening around policy and what people are saying in these meetings is what we want to be able to do. But we got to act as a body to be able to do that. That's why I need you to give us some space to do that. Second thing, I'm going to address what you're saying. Second thing, you said it twice, in between your mentioning of the 21st Century Task Force the first time and the second time, I suggested that in the last month we've added Commissioner Packnett as a co-chair of the Citizen Law Enforcement Relations Group for this very reason. This report is coming out in March, beginning of March. By the time we get to the end of the time for our report, we will have access to the best of that knowledge from her engagement in that room, from the reports there. Those meetings, quite frankly, are live streamed as well. You have access to those, and so do we, so that we can have that learning as a part of our process. But I'm gonna ask you to be seated now, actually, Mr. Miller, because we need to act, and we've promised the people that we have them out of here 10 minutes ago. So I'm just going to ask at this point, on a point of order, no. Mr. Miller, on a point of order. Well, I'm following the timeline at this point. I'm trying, so I appreciate that. I appreciate that. But if we go to our protocols, this portion of our meeting is set aside for the commission to act and to work. And I say again, we act in public, but what we're getting into is discussion that should happen in work groups for that engagement, or should happen in the public comment portion. That's not where we are. Where we are now is we need to restrict questions and comments to the commissioners and on the actions that are before them. So I'll invite commissioners to ask questions or to give comments on what is before you at this time. Are there any questions or comments from commissioners?
If there are none, would entertain a motion.
Yeah, so I would move, with the caveat, I would move that the following preliminary priorities be adopted by the commission. We need, yeah, so let's get a motion on the floor, then we can go back to discussion. So I would make that motion, and then with a second, then we could go back and see if there are other questions from commissioners.
Second, okay, the question?
Question?
I would like to see the priorities when we adopt them, if we could get them aligned to the legislation that's moving. Is there somewhere possibly on the website or report back so we can know how, what's going on with that?
Sure. The answer is yes.
Thank you. That's all.
It's been moved and seconded. Any other questions by members of the commission? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, abstentions, it passes. We'll turn it back over to the chair.
Thank you. Thank you, Tracy, and thank you, TR. We want to emphasize that there is lots of space for input and lots of space for reactions, and we will continue to make that available. The working group chairs and our staff are working very hard to make sure that we have plenty of space for that, as well as having in our meetings the chances for open mic and community input. And because our work is so broad and because we have so many topics, we need to make sure we structure this. I'm just going to very briefly wrap up. Thank you for your patience. You have been very kind to stay and to stay through this portion of the meeting. I want to say just in 30 seconds, we learned a great deal tonight. And I want to thank our speakers, a few of whom are still here, to say they did an incredible job distilling data in a short period of time. It will all be on the website and will all be able to be distilled and be reused. We learned that the wealth gap dwarfs the income gap. We learned what can happen when you create savings and economic opportunity. We learned that there's a challenge to the dream that the next generation will do better than the last. We learned that place matters. We learned that the economic realities of life and death are very real. We learned that there is power in sharing the power of the economy, and we learned that this should matter to all of us. And then we got a chance to talk about that in the breakout groups, and we listened very carefully to each other, and that information will come back to you at our next meeting, as well as be posted on the website. So our next meeting is March 2nd at the Missouri History Museum at 5 p.m. We will, in all likelihood, use a substantial portion of that meeting to talk about what we've been learning in the first 100 days of this task force and this commission, so that we are responsive to our community who needs to understand understand all that we've heard and learned in a distilled and very structured, thoughtful way. So we have ended these meetings as we have begun them with just pausing for a moment. So let me ask everybody to stand. Let me ask you to touch somebody, grab a hand, and just to sit for a moment. Bow your head, and whatever your faith tradition, or whether you have a faith tradition or not, just take a moment to pause, to be grateful for the day, to be grateful for the time, to think, to act, to together come as one in a community, just in this room and with each other, to be thankful that we have life, that we have opportunity, and that we know that we have great work to do together. And with that, we will be adjourned. Thank you.